Okay, thank you. Now the recording's in progress. And so the beginning of our program is just some kind of review. One thing is that we want to see that we are reading from the second book. Now, we gave that out to you. Isn't that nice? And it's the same as the first one. So it's now you got two books. You got the first book and the second book, part 2. This is according to the Gospel of Luke. And I just want to make some introductory comments about Luke. One is, as you know, the tradition is that he is a medical doctor, and some people would trace that to Upper Greece. People were able to do even operations at that time, even operations on your skull and things. So these were not fly-by-night people. These doctors were very, and they actually had herbs and other type things that would help with your diseases or your discomforts or other type things. And some of those are still in place today. You know, and we might be more sophisticated, but there's if you go down 75th Street, they have a thing there on herbs and spices and things like that. It's a shop that has those type of things with the intent of offering something. If you have a malady or a disease or something like that, they can give you something that will help you with that. Isn't that something the plant world gives us health? We don't have to have chemicals alone. So with that in mind, the book, the Dear and Glorious Physician, came out in the 50s, a thick book, about 500 pages, all on Luke and how he went around through the Roman Empire down into Egypt and other places to himself. And this is what we call a novella, which means that there is a certain amount of information, maybe very little on this, but then what the author does, it's a woman author, and what she does is she writes a beautiful kind of filling out of what would have happened, because we are in the Roman Empire. We got these things going on, and he is a doctor, and he becomes called for various things. And if you go to the second letter of Paul to the Corinthians, he's going to go from the Antioch of Pisidia, of Syria, and it's over here, and he's going to go west. And as he goes west, he gets to Cyprus, and he goes through Cyprus. He walks, that's 100 miles, so he walks with Barnabas, who came from there, by the way. And then they that was his first missionary journey. He goes up into Turkey, then he comes back towards the east, and then comes back and then takes the boat home. Then that was in the year 49 or so. Now this next one is in probably the year 51 or 52. Paul didn't have his conversion and then automatically start to do all these things. No, these things were 30 years after the time of Christ. Well, 20 years after the time of Christ. Christ died April 7th of the year 30. So this is if we're going to the 50s. So that's 20 years. A good half of those are spent in his own private prayer life out in the desert or so. But the other things are in the arguments they have between the Jewish Christians and the Antioch Christians, because the Antioch Christians are mainly for people who are Gentiles who have become Christian, and same with the Romans and things like that. They have become Christian, whereas the Judaizers feel that they are God's people, which they are, but that has morphed now. That is a preparation. It's like the porch that takes you into the building. And so the attitude of what the Jews are is that all of the statements in Jewish scriptures and stuff like that eventually point to Jesus. There are some people say, I think it's a little bit over-exaggerated, about 300 instances in the Old Testament that come into the New Testament, in quotes, especially in these gospel texts and in the letters. And so there are 3 gospels, and the longest one is Luke. So you have a beginning gospel in the Gospel of Mark in the year 70. In 80, you get in Syria, Antioch, Matthew writing his, and then you get the third one, which is going to be the Gospel of Luke. So those 3, they call them synoptics because they pretty much have the same thing. In other words, Luke is the longest, Mark is the shortest. So with this chart that I'm going to show you here is a kind of a statement that these books of the scriptures are not just something that people slap down. There was a man, German theologian back in the 1920s, said there were no historians here. There's no human contribution to these texts because it's all from the Holy Spirit. And so what they do is they just sew it together. I'm serious. They sew it together, with these sheets. And But that's not the way it is. The ones that are doing this are geniuses. And I'm going to show you just in a minute or two what we're going to take a look at. In other words, you can read these Gospels on many, many levels. Some people would say it's like Greek literature. Others say, no, it's like Roman poetry. Others say, no, it is a new creation, something that the world hasn't seen so far, something about the divinity. And then what we're going to notice is that if you start to read it, you get some repetitive things. For example, today we had a reading in the daily mass of a woman who had for 12 years been taking care of her illness, which was a drainage type thing. And she had doctors poking around, things like that. She spent all her money and for no good. And so she just touches Jesus' cloth. She knows, and you can't do that by the law, see, but she knows that Jesus is not operating that way. She touches, and Jesus says, who did that? And so he knows, but he wants to kind of, if there's a huge crowd there, he wants to know the person should step forward, which the person does. She's outside, and she has this curing of her illness. Meanwhile, Jesus is on the road to go to the synagogue's leading person, the man in charge of the synagogue. And and his daughter is dying, very clearly, very ill, in their house upstairs. And so what Jesus does now is, and strangely enough, this is the beauty of this whole passage. I don't want to go into it, takes too long. But the passage is, she is now 12 years old, just moving into her womanhood. And this lady is moving out of her womanhood for 12 years because she cannot do the things that women do in part of their, I don't know, a part of their rights that they have, to deal with things. And even if they've had children or haven't had children, there's something in there. So what we're dealing with then is kind of like a parallel. It's like an Oreo. You got a little black thing here, a little black thing here, and right in the middle, you got something else. Something else is what happens to this woman. She becomes a woman of faith. Jesus says, your faith has saved you. So, and that's what did it. So it wasn't that this woman just was picked out of the crowd and say, I'm going to do this for show. It is this woman has some kind of a soul that has been wounded by all this for 12 years. Now, when they get to the place where the woman is in Mark's gospel, they have the earliest vision of this. And the woman is 12 years old, and she's upstairs, and she's dying. And when they get there, she has died. And in the other ones, she has died first, and so, but and I'm not going to go into that. We'll take Mark's gospel. And so, because as you know, these gospels, they steal stuff from Mark. And so, in fact, about, let's take Matthew, about 2/3 of his stuff is in Mark. and if you go into Luke, the same thing, except that Luke adds a lot of parables and things like that. Matthew adds a lot of things of identity with the Old Testament. So each has their own kind of smarts. And so what happens is Jesus goes upstairs, says, what is the problem? He says, the woman has died. He says, no, she has not died. She has fallen asleep. And then this is a beautiful text here. He takes her by the hand and he says, Talitha koum, which in Hebrew says, arise. Now here you are in chapter 5 of Mark's gospel, and there will be a resurrection of Jesus, which strangely is not included in Mark's gospel. Jesus says to them at the Last Supper, go to Galilee, there I will meet you. And so that's where he ends. The other ones have some of the visions of Jesus in his risen state. So what's happening is this woman now of 12 years, and she gets up and she starts to serve them, just as it's a beautiful, beautiful thing for her to do. So I mentioned those type of things because what we want to do is get a little bit of the sense that these gospels are not just something that they slap together, but that they really have a kind of a sense to it, a direction to it. So let's take and put Mark in his gospel in Rome, the first one out. And why is that he there? Well, because of the fact that that's where Peter is, and he is a disciple of Peter. So if you have a lot of things going on with Peter, that will find their way into Mark's gospel. He kind of like has a record of that. And in so doing, he has little things in there, like on Sunday, we had a thing about Jesus asleep in the back of the boat with his head on a pillow. Well, that's for Mark. So somebody was there to see Jesus on a pillow. Who cares about where he is? So Matthew tosses that, and Luke tosses that. I mean, they don't say that he's asleep in the back on a pillow. That's irrelevant. We get that kind of an attitude here. So what I did in my study, which, by the way, got me a degree. The modern day business, and the book that I would refer to as Yukel, Y-U-K-L, was a leading kind of business methodology who tells you how to run businesses and things like that and what the essences are. You would have this in a graduate school of business. And I applied that to the gospel and found out that the gospel is exactly the same intent that the business law has for us. You say, well, you're crazy. Okay. Now, so let's take a look at the gospel of Mark. The reason I do this is because he is the kind of the prototype of what the other two, we call them synoptics, S-Y-N, because of the fact that means that they are doing the same thing. So synoptics means they have the same kind of thing. Even though they have different visions and different emphases, they still are giving the same outline. Here is the outline. You can see it's, you could fold this over, take this here and fold it over this way, and take this here and fold it over this way. And there you have a triptych. A triptych means a painting. And in the painting, you get two wings. So this is a wing and this is a wing. So you say, well, wait a minute, I thought this was the important part. It is. But what you get here is the center. Now, who does the center refer to? It refers to the Gospels, writers' intention that you people of the early church have to do what's happening in here. If I'm making some sense for you, the real heart of this gospel is not just to learn about Jesus, what he did, because that could be like literature or history. No, here is what you are to do. So let's take a quick look at this. And I'll start with this section over here. You see, you got Galilee. Okay, that's up in the north. You got the trip to Jerusalem. That's going down. And then over here you have Jerusalem. So those are the three topics. And they're very clear. You say, oh, so you mean that they don't blend into it? Well, they have their own unity. Now, this one here has this strange thing here. You have in the desert. I put that in there as to where the begins. In the desert, that's where it begins. And then I have A, B, C, D. These are the characteristics that are in the first segment of Mark's gospel. And the first thing you do is you summarize where it's been. So when the gospel opens up, this is the Son of God, and it mentions about John the Baptist, and so anyway, it gets open. So the first thing is a summary, tells you what happened before the next thing happened. The next thing happened, he gets his disciples. Only 4 of them though. Only 4 disciples are there. Okay. And then after he gets done, and you can see here it's 4 verses here. See how this goes? These are the opening verses. This is the title. This is the opening verses summary. This is the first part, which is the 4 apostles are with Jesus. They were out in the boat, remember? And then Jesus over evil. Now look at how long this is, see, because this is quite a heavy bit here, because the fact that you got now here, these were shorter, but here you go from chapter 1 all the way up to chapter 3:5. And then you get the reaction of the people, and that's going to be 3:6. Now, what's going to happen with this is that this sequence, A, B, C, D, is going to be repeated for the next section, okay? And then repeated for the next section. Am I making sense? You got 3 kind of segments of the first third of the mission in Galilee. And in that, you will have 3 times over this pattern. Now that helps you to remember these things, by the way, doesn't it? Because you know that you got something coming up. So what happens here? There's a summary, and it goes 3, 7 to 12. And that's where he gets into trouble, because that's where they plot his death. See, and they have had enough of Jesus. And so the Herodians, who were, not pagans, but they're, not religious, and the Pharisees plot Jesus' death. And then the next thing is that Jesus, now we should do something with the apostles. Well, he had 4 there. Now he's got the rest of them. So it's 12. Okay. Then Jesus over evil. Now look at how long this is. And look at chapter 5. That's where we were just talking about how the evil that afflicted this woman with her disease, and then the girl dying, are the things that are going to be corrected by Jesus. So what happens is Jesus over evil. So all of these things in here are Jesus' conquest. And then down here, you get the reaction of his family. You say, oh, this is going to be good, because here you got the Jewish people, and they're going to put Jesus to death. But here you get his family, and they're going to think he's crazy. Wasn't that Joseph's son? They say, and so there's all kind of talking here about Jesus being in league with the devil and with other type things. So when you read the gospel, you got to go to this section here. It says Jesus over evil. So even though evil is present, Jesus conquers it. And then finally, you get the reaction of the family, and it's negative. Now we go to the next one, and you get a summary. Now notice this 6:1, and then half of the passage, and then 6b, and that's the half of verse 6 there. And so chapters 6. So A is just part of this section, it's part of here. So he splits this here they think he's crazy, and here it is the summary of what went on before. And then now he gets his 12 disciples, but they're already been established. What does he do with them? He sends them out, and they come back, and they have the powers that Jesus has, and they love it because they did some healings, they did some preaching, they did other things. They come back and they say, this is terrific. We now are part of Jesus. So this is Jesus over evil, but it's done through his apostles. Then you get the reaction, which is the apostles. So you say, wow, this is great, because here you got negative. Here you got, negative, the reaction of the family. So we got the larger group is against Jesus, the smaller group. So here's the smallest group, which is the apostles, and they take a boat ride. A couple of them go out with Jesus and guess what happens when they go out there? Well, I'll tell you what happened before. And that is he created for 20,000 people. He created baskets that just filled up as he walked along. And then the same thing, and that was for the Jews. So that was 5. So that's 20,000 people were fed. Now, most people would say, well, that's just hokey pokey because you're just making stuff up. All you have to do is go out some summer night and take a look at the sky, and you will be able to see, so, wow, look at all those stars. Well, no, that's like a pinprick of what the universe is. There are billions of stars up there, and we just see about 12,000 of them on a good night. And so clearly, and so what's doing here is that we get a fantastic thing about Jesus multiplying for the crowd of 20,000. Then over here for the Gentiles, he does the same thing, but this time it's 4,000. So it's 4,000. I make that into about 16,000 people. So because they only count the men. See, I'm just the messenger. And so anyway, so the reaction of the apostles is, we forgot to bring bread. Oh, the whole thing has the layers of thought to it, which is that Jesus, you have brought us out here now, and it should be some kind of a moment of us to be maybe even the Eucharist or something like the people on the way to me. So this, is this making some sense? Mm-hmm. So what you see is, for the entire section here is all well laid out by the author of Mark. And here I put down an taxonomy of leadership, giving information, building relationships, making decisions, and influencing people. This is what the UCOL statement about what a leader does. They are giving information, they are building relationships, they're making decisions, they're influencing people. So that's a pattern that they have, and that's been transferred into the pattern that I have shown here, okay? Now, when we get here, we get another one of these ABCD things, because of the fact that we have 3 sessions here, and this is Jesus on the way to Jerusalem. So that's what we covered in our first half here was, we started and we ended up with chapter 9, 10, 11, 12 or so. And what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to where we get to this, and we get to this. So I'll just be real quick here. But this is what you see is we have the same thing. There's Jesus predicts his passion, predicts his passion, predicts his passion. Disciples don't understand, disciples don't understand, disciples don't understand. Teaching on the cross, teaching on the cross, teaching on the cross. And then further teaching that he has, a complement. And then blindness in sight. In other words, there is a blind man up here that's cured because he can't see. And it ends here, a blind man can't see. He's by the wayside there, and he says, Son of David, help me. And what happens? He is cured of his blindness. Now, what's the beauty of putting that in here? I mean, he cured a lot of people blindness all over the place. So, but what does it mean? It means that what Jesus is doing is precisely saying, you have to see, and he's not talking about physical seeing. He's talking about faith seeing. You have to have this faith. And then he gets through all of this, and what does he have? Now we're getting kind of like closer to this, because this man down here, here's what happens. Jesus starts to walk there at the lowest part of the surface of the earth. The river Jordan is coming down. They're on the east side. And Jesus is going to go up through the canyons and up to Bethany and then get to Jerusalem. Okay, so we're right here on the lowest part, and this man is sitting there, and so he gets cured of his blind because they say, "What do you want?" Jesus says, "What do you want to do? What me to do for?" He says, "I want to see." Now, to see is not visible. You know, it's not like Jesus is an optometrist or something like that. No, it's the fact that now he has faith. He has already called him son of David, which is a usual thing. You know, so he's the culmination of Judaism, and so there he is, blindness and sight. So this is the same thing: commitment to task, objective, subordinate ability, and cooperation. Then what we do here, this becomes almost a day by day thing, an hour by hour thing. You get entry into Jerusalem and all the events, and then all of a sudden Jesus is there, and then he is buried, and then the gospel ends. So they don't have a resurrection appearance as such like the others do. They have the thing you were supposed to do, he says very clearly at the Last Supper, is go up to Galilee. Galilee is the place where his miracles took place, so he wants his disciples to be the ones to build the early church. And one of the real kind of fundamental things that goes on in the early church is they have a lot of miracles. So, this is the way it's happening. Does this make some sense to you? It shows you that, when we're dealing with a scripture book, we can read it as literature, as poetry, as history. But this tells you what it is a growing understanding of the takeover of humanity by Jesus the Lord through the resurrection. So with that in mind, what else do I want to talk about? Well, I have something that I put into your binder, I believe. See if we can find it. Oops, there I'm opening the binder. Let's see what we have it. We want to thank Kathy for doing all this great work for us. And we're going to turn the page. Do you see two columns like this? You see that? It's like the first page after. You got that? You see it says Galilee and Jerusalem? Well, here's another way to read these Gospels. And I'm going to put Jesus on the left side and the Pharisees, Sadducees, Gentiles on the right side. And then I'm going to show through this chart that they have things that are of the same category, but in different places and different strengths. So let's see if I can convey that to you. Take a look at category A. Category A is where are we at? Well, let's take a look at Jesus. He's in the country. Where are the people? They're in Jerusalem. The Galilee people are on the edge of things. Jerusalem is the center of things. See, they think periphery. They would think that, that's like Darien. So, okay, I said that. You're supposed to have some reaction. Jesus it's provincial as opposed to the capital, and many synagogues and one temple. You see how there's a kind of a rolling understanding of things that are different. It depends on who you belong to. So if you're a Sadducee then you belong here on the right side, Jerusalem. If you're with Jesus, you should belong here in Galilee. Now let's go to section B. Section B is where the activity takes place, and you can see it's a place where Jesus is at home, a new beginning. He claims, I'm just going right down. He summons to conversion, a mustard plant, healing of the sick, demons cast out. Jesus imparts Moses' hands on a mountain. He assembles a circle of Jesus' authorities. All these things take place, up in the Galilee. Okay, let's go to the right-hand side. What happens in here? It says, well, this is where the scribes are, and where they predict Jesus' end as well. Caiaphas says it's better one man dies to save the people. So there's no proclamation of the kingdom of God. There's no summons to conversion. There's no fruit. There's no fig tree. There's no healing the sick. There's no demons. So when we get to Jerusalem, it's all toned down as with regard to these miracles and things. However, when in our gospel, Luke, we're going to get some fantastic parables. So here it is. The crowds react negatively. The opponents lay hand on Jesus, whereas Jesus put his hands on them. And the opponents lay hands on Jesus and do him harm, whereas in Jesus, when he puts his hands on you, it's doing good. And then on the mountain, there's a circle that falls apart and it all flee. Of course, that's the end of the beginning of the crucifixion. And then let's go to category C. Jesus takes the initiative. We're in Jerusalem now. He carries out his program. He does good work. He wins followers and he defeats his opponents. Well, that's pretty good. But what happens when you get to Jerusalem? The opponents take initiative. Jesus' opponents carry out their program. They do evil to Jesus. Jesus loses followers and opponents. So then we make this kind of generic. And so you have Jesus with success with all his miracles. Over here, you have Jesus with his failure because he is being sequestered, imprisoned, and put to death. Here he is in ascent, which is going greater, and descent here, which is losing your life. There's the new things for Jesus and the old stuff for the others, the activity for Jesus and the passivity for others, life for Jesus and death for Jesus. And euphoria, you can see that euphoria means life. Eu means good. So euphoria versus dysphoria. Dysphoria is the breaking down of Jesus. So here you have the crucifixion of Jesus, and over here. So this is another way to look at these things, just if you want to get into that kind of mode, that these gospel texts that we're dealing with are something far more than just statements of particular miracles, and that wows Jesus' friends and things like that. We're going to find out it actually ends up putting out a lot of negativity. Okay, so now with that in mind, what is our next introduction? The next introduction is this Brazilian angel is up there flapping wings, and when are you going to, give some honor to it? Well, here's to you. One of our parishioners was leaving today, and he's got a back problem. He's going to the doctor to get a shot. I said, well, I did that just last week. I was upset about something, and I went over to Chuck's and had a shot. Not really. Don't be telling Father Jeff. So,
but we mad that he couldn't go over and join you.
Well, that's true. And if he did, I'd elbow him. Let's take a quick look at our book, just to show you how it works. These things are a treasure to us. Now, the one who writes the commentary for this is a man. He's he's all over the place. He writes for the Bible Today, which is a magazine that comes out of Hyde Park in Chicago. And he is one of the great writers for them. So he is a learned person here. Other learned people centered. Chicago really has more seminaries than you would think, of all different religions and things like that. Lutheran, Episcopal, and other type things. The other center would be Washington, D.C., because you have the Catholic University there, and you have all the religious orders seem to have some kind of a education program there. I studied my theology was studied at the Whitefriars Hall, which we had some of the great writers of the time. They have a big, huge book called the Jerome Biblical Commentary, and that was put together by some of our Carmelites along with a whole bunch of other people. So they had asked me to go to Rome, and I looked at Rome and stuff like that, and I saw that they had people from all countries all around the world. That's kind of nice, but all the materials were in Latin. So I've taken a lot of Latin and stuff like that, but because I did that Joliet Catholic High School, it took 4 years Latin, then you take college Latin and stuff. But but here we have in Washington D.C. we had the best. So I said, well, no. I says, and besides, I don't like spaghetti that much. Now here's what happens with our book. And you can see that it says, this is lesson 2. When we had lesson 1, we went up to chapter 11. And now you can see that we're up to chapters 12 and 13. So I'll open up to where it says table of contents. It's right at the very beginning. A couple of pages, 3 or 4 pages. And you can see these are the chapter numbers. Now, we're not going to divide our things by chapters. Which is meanings that we have to fit this particular element in each of our sessions. We have outlined a series of sessions, and we are going to take them. And as we continue with one, we will be continuing perhaps with another and another. So instead of saying we're going to do 11 and 12, we'll see how that goes, because our program here does not have like conversation or discussion type things like other places have, where they have an hour discussion first among their people. We don't have enough for that. And then they start the lesson. So what we're going to do is, it says here, you can see it says lesson 1, introduction, Luke 12 and 13. So that's where we're going to get started today in our binder. We're going to start with chapter 12. Remember that in chapter 9, at the end of the chapter, and I use this phrase over and over again, and that was that there is a chin made out of flint. In other words, flint is something you chop and all of a sudden you get fire, and stuff like that. So anyway, I added that to what the text said, but the text said that Jesus turned his face towards Jerusalem with a resolve. This wasn't like, I'm taking you down there for a visit or something like that. We're going, and he knows, because he's already told it over and over again, and he knows on the way that they are going to see that Jesus will be crucified. He knows it very clearly. They kind of dodged the issue. They 3 times over in our thing here. See, 3 times over, Jesus teaches on the cross. Why? Because they don't understand what's going on. Even when they get down here on the 3rd one, they even think that they can send one of the mothers in to talk to Jesus and say, my 2 sons, I want one at the left and one at the right when the kingdom comes. Can you believe that? So, ooh. My doctor in Chicago is a Jewish fellow. We became great friends because I was with him for some years, 20 years or so, and he just retired. And marvelous, worldwide known on ethics, like hospital ethics and stuff. And we had a great admiration for each other. And but anyway, he would himself enjoy my little thing there. I said there was a Protestant and a Catholic and a Jewish mothers sitting down and saying, well, it says when does your child become a real person? And one said, well, after the baby's born, we get about maybe 6-7 years, and then it's really started as a person. Oh, okay, that's pretty good. Then they asked the next one, said, and when do you think that it occurs that this person is coming alive and stuff? And it says, oh, well, probably when they're a teenager or something like that, going on and stuff like that. And then they asked the mother, says, well, when do you think life begins for your child? She says, when he becomes a doctor. Okay. So it might be 35 at that age or something, or 25. So here we are. So you can see it says lesson 1, introduction, lesson 2, and it's got 2 chapters. See, because the reason for that is these chapters are not designed to be pure blocks. They are to cover a series of materials. So you can have one that's short and one that's long. You can have one that's in one place, and then you got, so that's why this method that we're going to use, I hope, is productive for us. But we have enough time over the next sessions. And I'm saying that today we might even have the possibility of getting both of Luke 12 and 13 in. Let's see if we can do that. I'm going to. My watch ran out of time, so I have my. So it's at 10:24. So that is, we started at 1:45. So this should be just over a half an hour plus. Are we right? Okay. I did take a long time here. So let's get started with our material. You can see, keep your book open. It says, now, because I'm just going to turn the page. See, there it says the Gospel according to Luke, part 2. These are the type of things you can read in between our sessions, because this is a backup. This is what materials will you use. I'm turning the page. Meet with your small group. We're not doing this. Then turn the next one. See, and it says Luke, part 2, lesson 1. And what it does is it gives an introduction. I'm going to turn the page, and you can see on the next page it says introduction. It says welcome to this. And so I would I think it's best to your advantage to read these introductions, even though we have presentations here. But here you have these, and notice how it goes. It starts off with 12 on the right side, and the gray part is the actual text. And then the next couple of pages of that, you can see this chapter 12 goes up to 34, up to 48, 59. So it's going to be quite lengthy. let's see how we can get it. And then it gets up to chapter 13. So let's get busy. What I'm going to do is to take these pages, if you'll excuse me. And what we have here, we're going to start with chapter 13 because I believe we finished off with chapter 12. Am I correct? So we're at chapter 13, and it's on the bottom right-hand side says page 34 on your material, you know, for our binder. Are you with me here? It's chapter 13, and it has 2 pages of commentary. Kathy, are we okay? We're on target? Perfect. As long as I say that. Let me say that over and over again. Wouldn't that be nice to go to the bishop and said, well, we had our Bible study. They said he was perfect. He says, what was the topic? I said, well, I don't know. I got a nice card from him yesterday. That was nice. Well, now you can see that this is kind of worked over with the commentary that's right on the page. So if you read the material from the Scripture Scholar up in Minneapolis, then you can come down with our material here today, and this will be kind of a resume of all that. So it's a call to repentance. Let's start to read here. Excuse me. This is so much better to read the actual text, kind of like word for word, because some words have, flavors to them or to levels to them or other type things, and you can discuss them, you can think it over. Otherwise, you can say, well, the first thing that Jesus did was go to, so-and-so town, and then he moved to another thing. Wait a minute, all I got was just like a map instead of getting some heaviness. Let's see this now. At that time, some people who were present there told him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with the blood of their sacrifice. Now, here's what I put down for my notes there. First of all, is Pilate gets involved in this. Pilate is a kind of ne'er-do-well, and that's how he got to be the head of the Roman army discipline in Caesarea, which is out on the Mediterranean Ocean there, and he built up a great big huge place there, beautiful wharfs and other type things, so that people could use that as a shipping place. And they had a big circle of stuff. Interestingly, what they would take is like this table this here, and they would pour in some kind of a mixture that they got out of the stuff that comes out of a volcano, and it solidifies in water. So what they do is they take this thing here, and it's surrounded by wood, and they lower it into the water, and then they can pull the wood up after a couple of days or weeks, and it's solid. So they can keep going up. And so what they do is they have a great big arm here and a great big arm here, and then the boats come in here to quiet and stuff like that instead of the waves going up and down. So that's what Caesarea is.
It's concrete.
Yeah, it's a concrete. Yeah. You would know more.
Romans invented.
Yes. Good.
Unbelievable, but they lost that technology maybe 100 years later.
So. Oh, okay.
But then rediscovered again.
Yeah.
But the Romans invented it, and it's called pozzolan. It needs fly ash from volcanoes.
Yes.
It's a chemical reaction.
Yes. My understanding is this, that they have 12 large ships, and they are on road. So the one is 6 of the ships goes down with the material you're talking about, and they unload it, and then they start back. Meanwhile, the other one comes in. So it's like a circular thing, So you got 6 boats all the time filling up and letting off and stuff like that. So anyway, now what had happened here is Pilate had committed some murders. I mean, for him, life was not genuine. So I put down here, the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with the blood of their sacrifices. So it seems that they were in the temple area, and that the Jews came in with their animals to be sacrificed as part of their rituals. And then what happens is Pilate comes in there where he's not supposed to be, and some of the people get slain out there. So I put down there, slain by order of Pilate. And so verse 2, he said in reply, do you think that because the Galileans suffered in this way, they were greater sinners than all the other Galileans? See, anyway, what we're getting here is, do you think that that I can do whatever I want? Well, you should, because it says, do you think this Galileans suffered in the way that they were greater sinners than the other Galileans? See, so I put down there is they were slain by the order of Pilate while in the temple, and verse 3, by no means, but I tell you, if you do not repent, you will perish. You will perish as they did. So anyway, when we're talking about Jesus here, this is Jesus talking about this of some time previous. But I tell you, if you do not repent, you will all perish as they did. Of those 18 people who were killed when the Tower of Siloam fell on them, were more guilty than everyone else who lived in Jerusalem. So this is a commentary by Luke, by the way. I'm sorry about putting Jesus in this, but this is what Luke is telling us. And Luke is telling us there were two instances where Pilate is showing his muscles, and that is that he went after some people while they were doing sacrifice, and then also there was a down at Siloam. Siloam is in the southeast part of Jerusalem. It was built in as a tunnel in the 700s by Hezekiah. And it was because the Assyrians were going to attack. So think of like a shoebox, or even our page here would be Jerusalem. That's what it is. It's pretty much, kind of like this. And over on this side, you have the temple area. Then down here, you have a wall and stuff like that. And there's kind of like a V shape here, because this side here is all high. This is where the rich people are. This is where the temple is. Then in between is a place where you kind of diminish all the way down to get outside the city. And so, but what Hezekiah did was he went outside the city to a spring, and the spring at Gihon. And he took the water from that spring, covered over it with planks and stuff, and had the water come into a third of a mile tunnel, and it came out into a pond. Jesus, in chapter 9 of his book, is going to tell us to a blind man, he puts mud on the guy's eyes, and then he has to go down to the pool of Siloam and wash them and stuff. Oh, okay, so I was in that. You can take tours through that. You can walk through it, but you're in water, so there was a short, if I can say so, lady in front of me, and every once in a while the water burps. By burping, I mean go whoa. So I was thinking to myself, boy, I better get ready to haul this lady up, because there's you can only go like this, I mean, it's a tunnel, so she can't like walk around and say, get out of my way. He says, no, I am the way. So, and she was a doctor from Australia. You say, how did I find out? Well, I find out a lot when you're grabbing something. So anyway, he says, if those 18 people were killed when the tower, so they must have been building some kind of a place maybe for pumping water. And put down there, you can see the southeast corner of Jerusalem. And so this is a great pool. It says, if you do not repent, you will perish as they did. So this is what Luke is telling us about. And then we get this parable of the fig tree. So this is where we find now in Mark's gospel, chapter 11, we find this very thing. And so now we're back to Jesus here. He told him this parable. He says, there was once a person who had a fig tree. Now, the fig tree is important because it occurs in the Gospels in two ways. One is it is the symbol for the people of Judaism, just like a sheep. There's a shepherd, and a sheep, and so it's kind of like an image. Well, the same thing with fig trees. That is a symbol of the people of Israel. It's a beautiful tree. However, it can also rot and die and stuff like that, and that gets Jesus all warmed up at the time of his visit to there in Jerusalem, which reminds me that just to be sure that we understand our chart here, and that is that Jesus starts up in the farthest northeastern part, and he starts on his journey all the way down to Jerusalem. So it is a single pilgrimage all the way down, coming in about chapter 13 or so into Jerusalem. And there is Jesus then talking about these things, and he's going to build up as they get through here. So let's continue. And this is all according to Luke. Luke said, if I tell you, if you do not repent, you will all perish as they did. So anyway, the parable of the barren fig tree, and I put even the Jewish translation of that. And he told him this parable. There's once a person who had a fig tree planted in his orchard. When he came in search of fruit on it, but found none. Now this is found also in Matthew's gospel. And that will happen, that you get material that is in Matthew that will come into Luke, and Mark that will come into Matthew. And so what you have here is the building on each other, because these are common stories that they remember and they want to put them in. And so Luke is a writer and he says, I've done a historical study on all this and I want to get all the stuff I can into my book. So that's why we have that here. I said, look at it, is in Mark chapter 11. So he said to the gardener, for 3 years now I've come in search of fruit on this fig tree, but have found none. So cut it down. Why should it exhaust the soil? In other words, in the parable, it's almost like we're making the decision that they are no gooders. You know, they haven't done anything. They haven't accomplished anything. They don't have faith in anything. They don't have any building of wholeness or holiness. And so anyway, that's how bad it is, that they're just, you know, cut them down and put in something else. However, the gardener says this, and he says to Jesus, says, sir, leave it for this year also, and I shall cultivate the ground around it and fertilize it. It may bear fruit in the future if you can cut it down. If not, you can cut it down. See, I put down there a continuing patience. See, in other words, Jesus is not the automatic deliverer of the need for penitence. No, he is one who is willing to take a patience. Remember God in the people that were down in Sodom and Gomorrah, and they were supposed to take like 100 people and kill them all and keep all the people. And so Abraham's brother goes and talks to God and says, can you cut it down a little bit? You know, and, okay. And then he comes back again and says, you know, if you could just cut it down to maybe 10 out of the whole city. So in other words, God was going to get rid of this whole city because they were not faithful. But he gets talked down to just 10. Well, the 10 start to walk out of there, and the ones behind don't behave right, so they're gone. So at least he gave them a chance. So the cure of a crippled woman on the Sabbath. So it says he was teaching in a synagogue on the Sabbath. And you can see that it says it shows concern for a woman. And also see in chapter 14, the land of end time. So the reason I put that in there about women is there's in some people's minds the fact that these are androgynous stories that are all ordained for men as opposed to for women. But we took a look, did we not, at some of our charts that we had for when we did the first sessions. You know, we listed all the whole full page of women. I mean, all the way down, small print too, you know, dozens upon. And then you also had scenes where there was a woman and a man. And so that counts also that the woman appeared. So Luke is very fond of this way of experiencing things. So anyway, it may bear fruit. So anyway, he was teaching a synagogue on the Sabbath. So now a woman was there for 18 years, had been crippled by a spirit. She was bent over, completely incapable of standing erect. So here you get another one of Jesus' encounters with a woman with some difficulties. And if you go back to the other chapters, you're going to find the same thing, that the women are involved. How about that girl that we talked about so anyway, when Jesus saw her, he called to her and said, woman, you are set free of your infirmity. So he laid his hands on her, and she at once stood up straight and glorified God. Now, this has some value to it, that they mentioned something as small as how he does this by putting his hands on her. Remember the blind man I told you about in John chapter 9? Jesus puts mud on. The lepers come. Does he say, stay over there on the other side? No, he goes up and he touches them. So we have the same thing with many of the other instances where Jesus is talking about the women. And so by touching her means that he has communicated to her, like it's like a brazen kind of grace that has moved into her heart and her being. And so anyway, but the clue here that we're going to get some trouble is that this is on the Sabbath. And a woman was there for 18 years. When Jesus saw her, he said, "Woman, you're free." He laid his hands on her, and she at once stood up straight and glorified God. So that's the appropriate thing. Glorified means that what you do is you put, we think of glory as kind of like a, if you see a saint, you see kind of a halo behind them. Well, that's what we do, is we kind of see a halo behind the heavenly kingdoms. Something is up there that's brilliant and beyond us. And so the leader of the synagogue that Jesus had cured on the Sabbath said to the crowd in reply, "There are 6 days when work could be done. Come on those days to be cured, not on the Sabbath day." You can see how strict they are on this. I remember being in the downtown Jerusalem on the Sabbath, and you could go into a restaurant, but if you go into a restaurant, you got to wash your hands and things like that, because that's the ritual and stuff like that. But at the same time, if you want to take the elevator in your hotel, you can't push the button. So what they do is they have an Arab child come in, like a 12-year-old, and they spend the day pushing the button. So your elevator can go back and down. You say, well, that seems to be overly, but they give a religious dimension to it. It's a reminder to them that the Sabbath is the day in which we and God are alone together. And so that has to be emphasized. So anyway, so the Lord said, now, of course, we are going to jump at this, are we not? Yes. That's because we're not living at that time. He said to them in reply, "Hypocrites." Hypo, hypo, it means especially harsh, and crits is you are a criticizer, and so you are a very heavy criticizer. That's what hypocrite is. "Do not each one of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his ass from the manger and lead it out for watering?" There are other examples could be of this. You're walking along with your ox, and all of a sudden it hits a hole in the ground or something like that and falls down and breaks its leg. Then you just leave it there then till the next day, to the next day of the week, and then you can go out and give it some water and take care of it, and and all that kind of stuff. It's so anyway. It's kind of like Jesus is throwing it right back at them. Then what he does, he goes to Abraham, this daughter of Abraham. See, so the leader of the synagogue says the Sabbath day, and the Lord says hypocrites. So this daughter of Abraham. See, what does he mean by that? That this Satan had bound this woman for 18 years now. She ought not to have been set free on the Sabbath day from this bondage. So this becomes almost impossible for us to think about it. 18 years of a malady like this, and she is a daughter of Abraham. In other words, she has, look at this. She has her license. You said you planned that? No, I have several licenses. That was in my pocket. So yeah, but that's what she has. Why? She's a daughter of Abraham. Now, Abraham was in the year 1800 before Christ. So it was not a present. It wasn't something that was like you went up to a booth, at the age of 12 and got your card. 1800 years, before Christ. So, but she is. That's just how the Jewish people feel, that they are Abraham's people, and Abraham was the one who God had given the first covenant to. So this woman, in effect, has a shaving off of what the covenant was, which was the daughter of Abraham should have the possibility of being cured on the Sabbath. All these things seem to be beyond us in our comprehension, but we have to understand exactly how the Jewish mindset is. Could you imagine if we, like in the United States, instead of taking our kids and having their baseball practice at 10 o'clock in the morning so they can't go to mass, or some of our people do that, they take their kids on stuff on the morning, because that it means that they both they're so proud that they can get this stuff done, but it means that they don't have to go to worship in that morning at all, father or son or daughter. And so that's what's happening here, is this woman is kind of like I put down the work of Satan. In other words, there was a certain equation in some people's mind that if you were ill or so, it was the result of your bad behavior or your possession by the devil, or Your demonic state is something of that would be for us hyper psychological breakdown. And so anyway, we take a look at that. This daughter of Abraham, who Satan had bound for 18 years now, ought she not to have been set free on the Sabbath day from this bondage? Yes. See, it's the greater result for the woman versus the ox. So if the ox can get pulled out of the ditch, this woman certainly can get cured. So when he said this, all his adversaries were humiliated, and the whole crowd rejoiced at all the splendid deeds done by him. Then we get the parable of the mustard seed. Now, have you noticed what we're doing here? Is that we are going through healings, and at the same time, we're going through these presentations where we have parables. Parables are a parallel. That's the way I like to look at it. And what the parable is a story that has within it an answer. For example, let's take David. David goes after Bathsheba. And so what he does is he takes a sheet of papyrus and he writes out her husband's name and then sends it to the general. Put her husband in the front row of the battle that they're doing against an enemy, knowing that he will be killed. And he was, which means that he can go over and take her as another wife, Bathsheba. Some people might think, well, Bathsheba kind of was a part of that as well. I mean, here, after all, is King David. But what happens is there is a parable that is told to King David by the man who was the prophet of the time. And he comes in and he tells this parable. And it became a way in which Jesus then operated on the same level. And that was that this farmer had a beautiful little sheep. It ate with them. It was their only animal, ate with them, slept inside with them, was a pet. It was, and okay. Then next door was a millionaire with hundreds upon hundreds of sheep. So a visitor comes and they're going to have a feast. What do? Well, you kill a sheep and then you have food, for the thing. So anyway, what happens is the millionaire comes over and takes the sheep away from the family. The kids are crying and the sheep is not happy about it either. And they go off and so they're sacrificed and then the thing goes on. And now David gets so mad when he hears this story. So mad, he shouts. I'm going to add to it. He probably jumps up and down and says, "Give me that man and I'll have him killed." And then the prophet comes up to him and says, "You are the man. You're the one who did it. Because you took all that she had, all that he had was her. That was it. And you took it away." And so, see, that's how the parable is. In other words, it's a lower level of understanding something that's a higher level. So the higher level would have been just if you said, this is something from, my upset with Bathsheba getting called out and stuff like that. No, it's there because he's not going to condemn himself unless he is forced to understand that he was the one by making the judgment already on who would do something like that. So that's what's happening here. So this daughter of Abraham has been brought. So this poor lady has got this thing for all 18 years. And then, so the adversaries were humiliated and the whole crowd rejoiced. So they were happy that something was turned upside down, especially when it comes to these things. Said, well, if this works for the farmers or this works for the others, then why shouldn't it work for this woman? So let's continue. So now we have the parable of the mustard seed. You all have heard this umpteen times, have you not? What is the kingdom of God like? To what can I compare it? It's like a mustard seed. So this again is a minor to a major. The minor is something, and I tried this one time and they were right, that you can stick it underneath your fingernail. It's a tiny little seed and it grows up to be something. And what does it grow up to be? Something huge, monstrous. It was a tree which the birds came and the birds would settle in there, have their nests and other type things and whistle to each other and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that means that the birds of the sky dwelt in its branches when it was fully grown. So he says, this is what the kingdom of God is like. In other words, you're living a life that is incomplete. It is forlorn at places and joyous in other places, but it is not the heavenly life. And so what is going to happen in heaven is going to be even the minor thing, like you yourself and your soul and your habits and your adoration and all these things get thrown together. And that gives you the right to be in the heavenly kingdom, because the heavenly kingdom is this huge, in the parable, this huge tree, and now you get to be part of it. To what shall I compare the kingdom of God? So this is another parable. So now, I notice it says the birds of the sky dwelt in breast. My comment there was likewise of 18 and 19, future grandeur of the kingdom. Yes, that's what it is. Okay, now we continue. It's on the next page. Now this is like yeast. And since most of you are expert chefs, you are far beyond my understanding. But I can tell you this, that Father Jeff and also Father Rob are both very good cooks. You say, how good are they? Well, for one thing is we get our stuff from Martha Stewart. You get one of those boxes and it comes with all kinds of stuff. Yeah. I could have been a decent, because I can read and stir. I wouldn't, I shouldn't have been thrown out, for that. But I kind of let them, they enjoy it, very much. Yeah, and the fact that I wash down the dishes afterwards, and there's no pictures of that. He says it's like yeast that a woman took and mixed with 3 measures of wheat flour, and the whole batch of dough was leavened. See, it's a small thing, so it resembles Jesus at the beginning. So in other words, that Jesus himself is something that has grown up to the age of 30, where he starts his ministry. And so it's and also the ministry that he starts has a small start to it, but it's immediate. And then you also have the disciples, and they in their ministry get out. So anyway, now let's go to 22. So you see, we have several of these parables, one after another. And notice that he doesn't take time to say, and by the way, here's our second parable, here's our third parable. He just says, here's a parable, here's a parable, here's a parable. So anyway, he passed through the towns and villages, teaching as he went, making his way to Jerusalem. Someone asked him, Lord, see, remember, now we're on the journey, which started in chapter 9, and here we are in chapter 13. So anyway, Lord, will only a few people be saved? Where did we get that from? Well, remember out in Nevada territory and stuff like that, the people who have transferred the person of Jesus into their own style of one man coming out of Pennsylvania, going all the way across the United States, and then starting a new religion and using the Bible as it. But also they came down with the fact that only 144,000 are going to be saved. So since there's been about 20 billion people alive since Adam and Eve, it's not quite fair that 144,000, so anyway, I'll give my license back. So this is incredible. So anyway, what's 12 by 12? 144. What's 10 by 10 by 10? Well, that's 1,000. So 144,000 is actually a numerical number made of the largest number that you could imagine back at that time in that place, using numbers. I just want to mention that. So it passed through the town, making his way to Jerusalem. Said, will only few be saved? He says, strive to enter through the narrow door, for many, I tell you, will attempt to enter, but will not be strong enough. Now, this is a very important thing, because a lot of people take umbrage at this. They really don't want to take this, because they're talking about things, where they want to kind of adjust it, because what Jesus is saying is it is a difficult thing to make decisions and choices for following the Jesus way of life. So, Lord, only a few people be saved. He says, now remember, Jesus here is talking at a time where hyperbole is the way that Greeks and Romans and stuff like that talk. So we're not saying that Jesus is giving a farce to this. What we're saying is that when you give something that's almost impossible, then you say, well, no, that's pretty impossible. You better, that's a really tough thing to do. But remember that thing about the camel, going through they say, oh yeah, through the eyes of a needle, a camel through it. Come on. So anyway, somebody say, oh, well, that was because they had a big arch called the camel. and then people could walk through it. Well, that misses the whole point. The whole point is it's very difficult, but you have to do it. In order to get into the kingdom, you have to display that you are a kingdom person. So let's continue. As the master of the household is ridden and locked the door. Anyway, I'm sorry, I jumped it. He went through towns and villages, 23, 24. Strive to enter through the narrow door, for many, I tell you, will attempt to enter, but will not be strong enough. After the master of the house had risen and locked the door, then will you stand outside knocking and saying, the Lord, open the door for us? He will say to you in reply, I do not know where you are from. Now, this is, I put down there only in Luke's gospel, so we don't get that in Mark or in Matthew. So this is something of an addition. And you will say, we ate and drank in your company, you taught in our streets. Then he will say to you, I do not know where you are from. Depart from me, all you evildoers. As I put down to Psalm 6:9, it has that particular thought. But so what Jesus is saying there is not that you are going to be condemned, but that it is that you have to be faithful to your covenant with me. There'll be wailing and grinding of teeth when you see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, and you yourselves cast out. Do you think there might be somewhere in the future a parable that Jesus will have someone who is going to be calling out to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in heaven and saying, just give me a drop of water? Do you think we will have a parable to that effect? Okay, you can all say yes? Yes, okay, good. We will get to it. It's in chapter 19. For behold, some who are at last will be first, and some are first who will be last. He has said that all along. He says, people will come from the east and west, from the north and south, and will recline at the table in the kingdom of God. So it is possible. Then I put down here, Herod's desire to kill Jesus is put in here as an addition. And only in this gospel do we find Herod active. He has, for example, a trial before Herod, just as he had a trial before the Roman authorities. So when we get the Roman authorities taking this, it's one thing, but then he gets a way to get it. Pilate gets a way to get rid of this whole mess with Jesus by sending Jesus up to Herod, because it's Herod's territory up there in Galilee. So that's what he does. But the others don't pick that up. So this is only in Luke do we have this mentioning of Herod. It says, Herod wants to kill you. He replied, go tell that fox. I double identified that particular word fox because for the Jewish mind, a fox is really a killer. In other words, the killer means that you got a nice chicken farm or a rabbit farm or even a small animal farm. And who comes in? The fox, gets his way into it and ruins your materials. So he says, go on, tell that fox. So it's something more than just an animal. It is the animal that comes in and ruins your thing. So it's a metaphor. Herod's domain of Galilee and Persia unflattering is where he comes from. He says, leave this area because Herod wants to kill you. So he said, Herod is there in Galilee and Perea, which is over on the left-hand side of Galilee. Let's go to verse 33. 2 says, he replied, go and tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and I perform healings today and tomorrow, and on the third day I accomplish my purpose. Notice these hints that we're getting on this. When he says on the third day, what does that tell you about? Well, that's exactly what Jesus is saying. This will be on the third day. You will find out that I am entering into the heavenly kingdom and to be with me. So he says, I must continue on my way today, tomorrow, and the following day. See, in other words, he's saying that Jesus should be followed to the cross. For it's impossible that a prophet should die outside of Jerusalem. So this is a very beautiful thing that Herod just puts in there, because what it does is it gives us on the journey, again, a display that Jesus is going to give his life for us. So I said this work would be complete at the holy city. And then we get the lament over Jerusalem. And here I couldn't resist myself. Jeremiah is saying these type of things. See, Jeremiah and the others, let's make it 600 years before the time of Christ, when the Babylonian captivity took place. So you had Jeremiah Ezekiel, Isaiah. So those are the three famous prophets, and they all have the same thing in mind, which is we have not kept the covenant, so the God is going to punish us by taking us up to the place of Babylon, which is 800 miles away. By direct flight, it's like 200 or so. But yeah, it's crossing a desert there. So what you have to do is go up on the west slopes and stuff like that, and then come across to the top, and then come down, making a big like hook coming down to where Babylon is. And they have to be there for some time, for 70 years. And then they are going to be released by Cyrus, who was a emperor from the Persia area. He comes with his army and he wipes out the army of Babylon, and so takes it over, and then sends the Jews back. And he even gives them some money. He says, here, take some money, rebuild your temple, rebuild your place. That's pretty good. The Eastern Church makes him a saint, by the way. We don't. Then here's then what Jesus has. And it's really a wailing. It's really a deep, deep sorrow, possibly even tears on the face of Jesus. Jerusalem, Jerusalem. See how this is a lament. You who kill the prophets and stone those who sent to you. How many times I yearned to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you were unwilling. See, now this, I put down, there's a city of destiny. The one place in the world that was important to the Jews was Jerusalem. It was the center of the universe. And so what we get here, though, is this hen. This would be very understandable if you heard this morning on the early morning TV. Let's say you're coming in. Well, okay, the bar closes like at 7:30 in the morning, so that means you got to go home. And then when you get there, what happens? They tell you there was a fire, I believe down in Texas, a huge fire of an entire building, not just like this thing, like a big, huge factory for chickens. And to give chickens to all the places who serve chickens. Chickens are beating out the steaks and stuff, but it's all in flames now. So anyway, your house will be abandoned. A hen gathers her chickens, her wings. Behold, your house will be abandoned, but I tell you, you not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. There is a church that is in the side of the place going up to the place where Jesus is going to be for the evening later on at a time. So there you have on the Mount of Olives, a section of which, by the way, is owned by Mark's parents. That's where he has the Last Supper in Mark's house, the gospel writer. And what Jesus does is he's crying over Jerusalem. So there is a place on the side there, and I remember, and I'm going to give the year 1986, a group of us Carmelites were over in Israel because the Intifada was going on and nobody was going to Israel. And the person who we had in our parish, one of our parishes in New Jersey, had a thing in downtown New York that was a travel agency, and she wanted to have people over there in Israel because they wanted to keep the people that she had, under her control, would get money and stuff like that, and so they all worked together. But nobody's going, so they called up the Carmelite Provincial, and they said, we can get you over there. It's actually safe over there because it's the city. But if you want to go, you can go, and I'll give it to you for cost. So then, we kind of listened to that. And then the provincial said, and if you can't afford it, now I lived in Woodlawn at that time, the second out of 92 areas of Chicago. This was number 91 economy. So anyway, then he said, well, and if you don't have it, we will pay for you. Now, that's where the word nanosecond came in. And it was right there that, oh, yeah, well, I'm packing it now. Well, we did. There was about 15 of us, and that was right. There was nobody there. So when we got to museums and other places, there were very few except for the people that lived there. So it was a wonderful trip. But anyway, I say that because of the fact that this church then was built on the slope of the Mount of Olives, where Jesus is weeping in lament for Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Another place he says, I would have taken you as my beloved, but it doesn't work out that way. Isn't that something, that what we're getting is what you might call the human side of Jesus, but that's always there. But this is a very, very strong statement that we're just getting. Okay, so now we have about 10 minutes left. So let's take some questions or observations first, and then we will perhaps just take a quick look at what next week is going to be. So does anybody have any thoughts or on what you've come up with today?
Father Bob, I don't ever want to steal your thunder, but I finished this book, part of my winter reading.
Oh, yes.
And I was wondering if it is the most amazing book I've ever read.
Yes.
Like you said, I'm an engineer. And if you're some kind of person of science, you will question everything. And
yes.
This is just unbelievable. I don't know if you want to show it on the thing, but yes, just to
yeah, okay, yeah. Why don't you bring it up? We've talked about this before because we got a personal
last year.
We got a personal friendship, but we also got a book friendship. So. Now this is a picture from the actual shroud. In the 1890s, they were going to take a picture of this using their camera. Now, I've seen their camera because I've studied this, and I've studied this in Turin. So I know what I'm, So anyway, they have one. They have a box there. The box is as tall as this table and about half of this table, and that's the camera. Because in other words, it's a huge camera. They don't have the fancy stuff we have today, and it had a great big huge thing there. They took a picture, and the guy who had this then the negative, and the shroud itself is very thin. I thought it was going to be coarse and stuff like that, but it wasn't. It was very thin. It's like a napkin. And secondly, it was getting lighter and stuff like that. So they got it in nitrogen now in the thing. I saw it in 2013. The actual one, I stood there from here to there as I stood for the shroud. So anyway, when he took this picture, he came back at nighttime to get the negative. And when he looked at the negative, literally fell over because he was seeing the face of Christ. Because look at how clear it is when you see this, as opposed to just seeing something very light on the cloth. He didn't know that he had come that close he came to this. Isn't that fascinating? And then from that point on, the study of this intensified. They used Air Force stuff from Arizona, I believe, to come in with these cameras, and they took 3D pictures. You say, how do you do that? It's flat. So what you do is you lay out the cloth, you put down this specialized camera, and it picks out by the shade and darkness and light, stuff like that. They shape it into a 3-dimensional. So when they have the museum, which is the shroud is in the cathedral at Turin, and it was only brought out, I think, 3 or 4 times in the last century, and only once so far this century. And so I wouldn't have missed that. In fact, it's when I came here, I went there. So anyway, when they decided to use all the scientific effort to get over this nowadays, and they're finding, the one thing that you wouldn't expect to be a proof of this is botany, because of the small things that are in the air and stuff like that. From Jerusalem down to Hebron was a specialized flowers and stuff like that. And they're not there anymore. They weren't anymore. They just was that particular area. Well, they had that one, do a little vacuum on this, and you can pick up some of this and say, well, where'd they get that from? So it was in the shroud, because some people said, well, they painted that in 1300. Bogus. How can you paint something like this? There's so many ways to look at this. But one of the ways is that in the Second World War, when the nuclear bomb went off, some man was standing in one of the cities in front of a car, and made of metal. So anyway, he of course was torched. But when they came to there, they found out that there was an outline of this man with the fire of the nuclear bomb. So the people who want to say this, not just out of their own spirituality, but out of the scientific is you cannot find a way in which that got on that cloth. It was not put into the cloth. It was not, anything. However, and in National Review, which is a political magazine back in the 50s, I got it early in my life. Yeah, I was in the crib and stuff like that, and I had, so anyway. But anyway, they did a study on this, and they found out that this idea of absorbing the rays and stuff like that to put something on something else, said, well, that might be the way the Shroud of Turin got. In other words, there was a burst of light and heat and warmth or whatever. It has to be mysterious is how it got on there, and they're thinking that's exactly what happened. It's something like that. So.
And it came from the inside.
Yes.
Because his backside is on one side of the shroud.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't go through.
Yeah.
Cloth.
Yeah. Yes.
The author.
You could pass it around or something. Anyone.
Dr. Gilbert Lavoie, Lavoie, Gilbert Lavoie.
Thank you.
When I was the Shroud of Jesus. And the sign, John ingeniously concealed. Yeah, they have good pictures and stuff in here. Yeah, I've studied this for about 40 years and stuff like that. I remember talking with high school students and stuff like that. I had a sheet 14 foot by 3 and then 3 by 6. Then we'd lay down a student here, and then we'd pull this part here over. Then we'd pull this part back. And then you see, oh, that's the body there. And there's the back over here. Wow. They thought more highly of that because usually I'm kind of flabbergasted. So anyway, that was, yeah. So anything else would you like to comment on? Yeah, are we okay with our sessions here? Yeah, we knew that last week it just would be impossible. Everything shut down. So.
Okay, so let me start the video. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to stop our video. Thank you everyone for watching today. See you next week. Stopping and recording.
Yeah, chapter 14 is very similar to this, so we're just going to keep working on this.